Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome. My name is Kelsey Wetzel, and I am Connecting Young Nebraskans Executive Coordinator. At CYN, we connect young Nebraskans and empower them to lead and shape the future of our communities and state. I want to thank you all for joining CYN's newest virtual program. I want to create community change through fundraising. Now what? During this webinar, we will discuss the following topics: components of fundraising, finding the funding and leveraging your network, getting comfortable making the ask, and best practices in resource sharing. CYN is excited to begin this conversation today with our amazing panelists. CYN will be recording this session and it will be posted to the CYN YouTube channel. We are excited to continue offering the network programs in the Now What series. The next webinar will be held in July. Finally, CYN's 2023 Summit will be held on October 18th and 19th in Kearney at the Eunice Conference Center North in Crown Plaza. Registration information will be available in June and will be shared with the network. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's facilitator, Anders Olson, CYN's co-chair and Nebraska Community Foundation's Director of Peer Learning.
Thank you, Kelsey. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Like Kelsey said, my name is Anders Olson. I am the chair of Connecting Nebraskans. I'm sure I say this every time we get together, but we have a really fantastic session lined up today. Today's title is I Want to Create Community Change Through Fundraising. Now what? We have 4 speakers lined up that are going to bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to creating community change and share their expertise on how that is accomplished through fundraising and identifying funding in different places. Our plan today is to spend about 10 to 12 minutes visiting with each of them. Please feel free to chime in with questions in the chat throughout our time together today. Speaking of the chat, I've been sharing a link kind of throughout the waiting period here as we're getting kicked off. It's a link to our Google Slides that we like to use here at CYN. I would encourage you to follow that link if you haven't already. And then go to slides 3, 4, or 5. Those are our sign-in pages, and share your name, pronouns, where you're calling in from, and then we'd love to know what community projects lately have really inspired you. If you could share that on any of those 3 slides, like I said, bonus points if you can provide a link to one of those as well. So afterwards, we can all continue to be inspired and share some of that good news that's going on around the state. Let's take a minute and sign in. All right, so we got some people from Kearney, Lincoln. All right, well, while everyone continues to sign in, I'm gonna share a little bit more about kind of the background on why this session was organized. So as you know, our organization's mission is to connect young Nebraskans and empower them to lead and shape the future of our communities. Part of shaping the future of communities is seeing the vision of what change we want to create. As you can see in the sign-in sheet, there's all kinds of work already being done to create the communities we want to live, work, and play in. Young Nebraskans are prime candidates to create that change, especially long-lasting change. One of our values here at CYN is evolving. CYN is a platform that supports emerging leaders to rise to the opportunities of our ever-changing communities. We'd love to hear stories from CYNers that have stepped up to these opportunities and found ways to make these dreams come to life. Change wouldn't happen without people like you who care about their places taking the lead to create it. Now, while there are ways to create change that don't involve funding or the need for fundraising at all, a high percentage of projects, regardless of scope and size, requires some kind of funding. Fundraising is a skill that anyone can learn to do, and is really empowering once you get the hang of it and know that it's not just all science, it's not all art. It really is a combination of the two. Our panelists today, I think, are going to have some great insight on that kind of marriage of art and science when it comes to fundraising, as we dive into this a little bit further. So, any questions before we dive into our panel? Awesome. Well, I will ask one other question, I guess, before we dive into it. I would love to, for the folks that are on Zoom today, just so we can get a read of who all is in the room and what your experience with fundraising is. In the chat, would you be willing to put in there, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your comfortability with fundraising? 1 being pretty cautious, 10 being very confident. Where do you fall in that range? You're a 7. Okay. 2 or 3, 5. Okay. Okay. Awesome. 6.782. Thank you, Casey. Very scientific. Love that. All right. So that's a good read of knowing where everyone's at on our experience level. So we're there, we're comfortable, we're probably working at it to make sure that we're very comfortable when we're meeting with folks. So why don't we roll on into our first panelist, Casey Balitz. So Casey, as Chief Operating Officer, Casey works with Nebraska Community Foundation as their with staff, volunteers, donors, and organizational partners to impact the future of Greater Nebraska. He believes NCF will change both the story and reality of rural places in Nebraska in dynamic and positive ways. Casey is based in Columbus, but spends part of his time at the Lincoln office and travels regularly to work with Nebraskans across the state. As a former NCF board member, fund advisory committee member of the Columbus Area Future Fund, Casey has a deep appreciation for NCF's culture and accomplishments. He's a graduate of Truman University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Prior to joining NCF in 2019, he was the president of the Columbus Area Chamber of Commerce for 18 years, directing business and community development efforts for the 800 members in the Columbus region. Casey also serves as head volleyball coach at Columbus Lakeview High School. Casey, thank you for joining us today. You've had a lot of experience in the world of community development. When you started working with in community development, what were some of the initial ways that you were approaching fundraising and making an impact in the community?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Anders. I guess specifically to answer that question, when I started in community development, which has now been, 2 decades ago, working at the Columbus Chamber, well, as a volunteer and then working at the Columbus Chamber, the answer to that would have been through pretty traditional sponsorships. That's how we were raising money at that point. And I think that has evolved somewhat. Well, it's evolved significantly, I guess, in my own personal and professional experience now working for Nebraska Community Foundation, where we are much more focused on just simply getting out and as our friend Jim says, see the people, see the people, see the people, and having those one-on-one conversations with folks who may want to support your mission is really our primary driver. And now things like sponsorships and other kinds of tools are much more secondary to simply going out and having conversations with friends and neighbors.
So I talked about having conversations with friends and neighbors. Can you talk about some of the advantages of approaching people one-on-one compared to kind of just doing a general ask to folks through ads or posts on social media, things like that?
Right. Well, the simple answer is it's more effective. I mean, that we could stop there and that would answer the question. But why is it more effective? I mean, I think there's very little question that it is harder to say no. It's easier to say yes when you're having a conversation with someone face to face, when it's someone that you know and respect and you have an existing relationship with. All of those factors make it simply more effective to do fundraising in that fashion, as opposed to sending out a solicitation letter or having an event or whatever it might be. From an organizational perspective, I would suggest it's also more efficient and effective in comparison to holding events, simply because the return on the investment of time and energy that you have to make. We all know how much work events are. Fundraising events are no different. And so, just organizationally, what's the comparison there between the investment you're making in setting up, executing, following up, et cetera, on a fundraising event, as opposed to having either staff or volunteers simply, again, out having conversations with friends and neighbors? The comparison is going to come out ahead in terms of doing the fundraising in that one-on-one way.
That makes total sense. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know that at Nebraska Community Foundation, there's communities all over that we work with that have big, ambitious goals, big, ambitious ideas. And it can be, when you have that idea up front, it can be kind of overwhelming to think through, how do we get to this big goal? Do you have any ways that you can share how to break down that process into kind of some smaller bite-sized pieces?
Right. Well, certainly that what you just said is the key, is breaking it down into chunks that are a little more manageable. Now that could be breaking down the process into a little more bite-sized pieces. It can also be, practical matter, like simply breaking down the prospect list into bite-sized pieces and then having enough people to execute the plan. It can certainly be a philosophical approach to that as well. So as opposed to allowing yourself to get too hung up on the overall scope and size and challenge that's in front of you, philosophically break that down into smaller pieces as well. So for instance, I would suggest that, one of the challenges that many or almost all of us face is just getting over the fear of asking. And so how do we get past that? Use the tools and techniques to get past that. And that's one more barrier you're past. You can move on to the next and the next. And so, yeah, even really big projects can be undertaken one step at a time. And I would say, maybe just a last thought on that one. I know certainly what helps many communities in the NCF network or any network where you have peers is learning about, experiencing some of the successes that others are having and taking from that some inspiration, but certainly taking from that some comfort, maybe, that even though it feels like a big project on the front end, this community next door, which looks a whole lot like us, they just went and did something of a similar size and scope. So yeah, maybe we can do it too. And I think that's not exactly the question of how do you break it down into steps, but I think it's a critical piece of whether it's a community or an organization, whatever, being willing to take that first step and think that something is possible that maybe on the surface seems almost impossible.
No, but knowing that you're not the only one that's working to it, I think that's a great way to approach this, Casey, and not being afraid to ask for help as you're trying to tackle some of these big dreams.
Yep.
Awesome. That makes complete sense. Now I know it may not be the case on this call with having folks with some experience, but I know some folks that weren't able to tune in today that are going to be watching might not have as much experience meeting with the donor one-on-one. Would you be able to walk through a little bit some of the basics of what you do to prepare before meeting with the donor, just on kind of fundraising 101 of what are some things you would encourage people to do before they went out and visited with someone?
Right. Well, the first step, Anders, is actually not even preparing for the visit. We say many times that you have to build a relationship before you need it. And so really in an ideal world, you're having these fundraising conversations with people that you already have a relationship with. And I've seen it over and over in some really big fundraising instances and others that aren't even fundraising, but boy, that holds true in virtually every context or circumstance. Because once you need that relationship, it changes the nature of that relationship, I would say forever. So if the first time you ever have a conversation with someone, you're asking them for money, that's just a different conversation than if it's someone with whom you've built a relationship over time.
Definitely.
In a different context. And so, that's not specifically preparing for a fundraising call, but it is super critical that you've got to build a relationship before you need it. So having done that, I think obviously you need to be prepared enough to be comfortable. There's no better way to be comfortable in that setting than to know your stuff and to know the messaging and have the materials and whatever the specific circumstance is. And I'd say all of that starts with the most important bit of preparation is to know your own why, not the letter Y, but WHY. If you know your why and you can share that, then you're off to a great start. As one of our friends in North Central Nebraska says, this is his quote, I could never ask anybody for money, but can I tell them about, my vision for the future of this county? Yeah, I can do that. And as all of you can imagine, he's been plenty successful raising money because he knows his why and he's able to share that passionately. And that's a pretty good start to being able to have a successful fundraising call. So you got to know your why and you got to believe it. You can't fake that one, I don't think. So you start with that, why you're there. You prepare well enough to know them, to know why they might be interested. And then your stuff, your campaign details or what you're asking for. I think that's a good start to being confident walking into that meeting.
Oh, those are fantastic. Build that relationship where you need it. Know your why for yourself, for the people you're meeting, for the project itself. That's fantastic, Casey. Thank you for sharing some of that on kind of personal visits, one-on-one visits when it comes to fundraising. I'm going to shift to our next person. We'll come back to you in a bit, Casey, if that's all right. Kevin Mahler is up next. Kevin's with Contributed Line.
Hello.
So Kevin's the owner and president of Contributed Line fundraising consultancy. Helps nonprofit organizations create infrastructure for philanthropy and exceed fundraising goals through strategy development and deployment. Kevin's worked in the nonprofit sector since 2008, has helped organizations in subsectors of human services, higher ed, immigrant and refugee services, food security, fine arts, military and veteran support, and faith-based organizations. He earned his master's degree from Michigan State, bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa. He lives in Omaha. I served on the board of directors of the Grant Professional Association Nebraska chapter and the New Territory magazine. Kevin, thank you for joining us today. Was there anything else you'd like to share on your background and what kind of brought you into this line of work?
Hey, Anders, thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. This is a pretty balanced room. We've got half presenters and half attendees. So that's good. Is there more that you need to know about me? Well, that's a dangerous question to ask, because that's like asking my parents, how's your health doing? Because they'll just start talking and won't stop. So you don't want to, yeah, there's more to know about me, but you hit the important points. And so Anders asked me to talk today about grant writing. And so, you know, I don't necessarily know who I'm talking to, although I've been furiously looking on LinkedIn to find all of you and connect with each of you. And Casey, great to hear your perspective this morning. That's I can tell you're up to good things in your neighborhood. So like without fully understanding everyone's experience with grant writing, other than Anders, who I had the pleasure of speaking with a couple weeks ago, and Paul, who I've known for several years. I just want to say 3 things about grant writing, and maybe this is, you know, what you believe as well. Maybe this is a fresh take, or maybe you'll want to, you know, push back and you know, ask me a question or offer an opposing view on this. But when Anders said, you know, talk to a room of strangers for just a fraction of an hour about grant writing, here are the 3 things that I would like to say to be helpful. And because I didn't think I would want to screen share, I just wrote them on my whiteboard here. And my whiteboard, it says subscription search engines. If you are, you know, wanting to know what's up in the world of available grants nationally, I want to offer 3 search engines, each of which are subscription based. So I like GrantStation. I like Instrumental, and that's spelled instrumental without the A. And I like Foundation Directory. Okay, Google will get you pretty far. I will tell you that, but just these subscription things, you can pay for a month of subscription and do hours of research and then end your subscription after 1 month. And it will give you a decent look at what I look at all the time, and just what it's like in that, you know, to really, you know, help you understand what's available and who's granting to who, and who is on boards, and what the granting behavior is of all the foundations that you've been curious about. So those are 3 things. Enjoy. And then so I say the word relationships here. I wish I hadn't wrote that, but I just couldn't think of a better word. Other than to say that I really believe that the days of sitting in your pajamas and filling out grant applications and hoping for money, those days are over, if they ever really even existed. I think that that it's really a myth to believe that you can keep grant makers at arm's length and just anonymously fill out forms and hit submit and cross your fingers. I think that foundations such as the one being represented here today, Peter Kiewit Foundation with Paul, the staff that work at foundations definitely are worth engaging. Some are very welcoming, others just have their contact information on the website, others you have to dig into the 990. But I try to encourage people to think of grants and grant application writing as a formalization of a relationship and a commitment.
Interesting.
That happens on a human level, kind of like what Casey was talking about a few minutes ago. So this is the Nebraska young people. I hope that no one's too young to remember Mitt Romney, who said in a debate that corporations are people, and he really got dogged for that. But I just want to remind you that, you know, something may be called a fund, something may be called a foundation or an endowment, but human beings make these decisions, and dialogue is so important right now. Dialogue is so important with where we are with funding opportunities, because, you know, I may say after school program, you may say child development. And if we're speaking two different languages on paper, that's never going to overlap. But if we have the opportunity and the serendipity to meet in person and have that, or on Zoom, but a live dialogue is what I'm saying. Zoom, in person, phone, just the ability to have some unstructured ability to speak back and forth. That's going to help us understand that even though I'm using a certain kind of vocabulary to talk about kids and you're using a different vocabulary to talk about kids, that we actually are valuing the same thing, or that we're not. Maybe we're using the same language and we've discovered that we don't, you know, we're not in sync. You know, this is worth a dialogue because that is going to inform how easy the grant application process is. That's all I can say about it right now. I've limited time. So I'll move on to this point about leverage, which is that when we talk about grants, these are a great opportunity for leverage for when you're in the kind of conversations that Casey was talking about. It's, you know, the foundations that put out a deadline 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times a year or more, and they have this opportunity that's out there, that's well established. You know, this is a great way to create urgency when you're sitting around your campaign or your fundraising committee meeting and saying, we have donors in mind, we have a need. What's our angle? What's our message? Why now? Why do we need to talk to donors now? And the answer is because we have a deadline for another foundation on the 15th, and we need to show commitments. And so, because, you know, you, the donor, are a you know, just a private individual who has the ability to make gifts or grants, as the case may be, kind of at your own schedule. There's another organization that's putting out a date, and we need to show a broad base of support. So therefore, the time is now. So when I first learned about matching grants, that really kind of psyched me out, because, you know, oh my gosh, there's matching, and like, you know, what if, if you match it, then is the match not good anymore? And then you have to start over. And how do you have to keep track of these things? And what if you miss a deadline? And over the years, I have come to think about it, and I encourage other people to think about it as everything is matching, everything is leverage. People want to, I know that when I donate to organizations, that I don't want to be the only one propping something up. I want to see that other people are behind it, whether it's 6 other people or 4 other people or 6,000 other people. I want to know that I'm in the company of other people who value this. So that's what I mean when I say leverage with grants. Their deadlines are great moments not to ask for money from the direct entity from which you are to whom you are submitting your request, but also everyone else who's in your top 25 friends. So with that, I will stop talking and ask for questions or pass the mic to others. And I hope that you can take some nugget of this that gives you curiosity, inspiration, or anger.
No anger on my end. That was fantastic. No, I really loved how you were able to tie or explain the relationship between personal asks and how they can really be leveraged with the help of grants from foundations. I think that's a really important lesson as people are thinking about how to engage foundations, not as ways to kind of be a quick fix for all of the fundraising needs, but as a real value add as you're reaching out to folks. Thank you for sharing those points. And I think that really segues well into talking to Paul. Paul Turnus with Peter Kiewit Foundation. Paul is a community investment officer there. He helps supports the efforts to create places where Nebraska locals can live, work, and play. He brings board experience in business, nonprofits, leadership, and fundraising. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I know that in your role, you have the opportunity to learn about projects going on all over the state. I'm sure you've seen projects of all shapes and sizes. Let's say someone in the CYN network has an ambitious project they're starting to organize. From your perspective, what would be some of those early stage pieces of advice you'd have for them?
That's a great question. I think an important thing is to find your coalition of the willing. So if you look around your community, there's nothing positive that's happened that didn't start with someone's idea, but nothing can be accomplished alone. So I would look around and see where there might be shared momentum on whatever idea or opportunity you see for your community. It also makes the work easier, a little bit lighter. You don't have to shoulder it all on your own. So find someone that's willing to do the work with you. And then, I bring a little bit different perspective being based in Omaha. We look at work across Nebraska, but looking for local support is important. So, going off of what Casey and Kevin shared about making some of those early asks, if you're pursuing any type of funding source not based in your community, it is almost impossible to get someone to go in without demonstrating local support for that. And that's both not just monetary, even though that's the most tangible, but where you're building partnerships, people that you might have on like a committee or advisory role to help you make connections and inform the opportunity in front of you, help shape it. So I would say that's important to develop that local support, both monetary and relationships, so you can have a broader appeal beyond your own community, if that makes sense.
Of course, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Along those lines, Paul, I'm curious what what you can share with us on maybe just some misconceptions that you'd like to even clarify when it comes to folks applying for grants, that whether folks in this group would be good to know or be able to share with others as they're developing their fundraising strategies.
Yeah, I think one misconception is that it isn't okay to ask questions. I'm surprised how many communities and people I meet with that they have a lot of interesting things to share, but they don't ask many questions of who they're meeting with. You're the expert. You have all the knowledge at your fingertips, but you're going to be sharing that story with multiple people that, you know, they have their own experience and knowledge they bring to the conversation, and not everything that appeals to you appeals to them specific to your project. So I think it's okay to actually set it up and toss a question rather than like share your whole story. You know, you hear the elevator pitch, a 30-second hook, a 6-word story, like find something short and compelling and then say, you know, I can take this many directions. I can speak to the project, the organization, the community, the need and opportunity in front of us, but I want to make sure it's a good use of everyone's time, especially yours, and would love to know what questions do you have? What can I answer out of the gate that really gives you the information you need to learn more about the project and get excited about what we're looking at today. And start where the other person wants to start. Some people are linear thinkers, right? Some want the shiny, some want to know all context first. See where you need to start so it's a good use of your time and a good use of your number of your words. So I think that is one thing. Another misconception, I think, is that one no means it's not a good idea. One no is one no. Working for a foundation, I spend most of my time telling people no. It's not telling them that it's a bad idea. I often try and pivot and find other ways that if they're wanting some additional feedback or input, like how can I help them strengthen their case for the next person they're going to present the idea to? So one no is one no. Don't get discouraged. If we, you know, that the overused cliche of a baby going to toddler learning to walk, if that little kid gave up every time they fell, none of us would be around today, right? Like you got to get used to the no to find the yes. And whether you get the yes or the no, it's perfectly fine to also ask, you know what? Thank you for your time, whether a yes or no. Like, who else do you think we should be talking to? Who do you know that would be excited about this opportunity? Just because I said no doesn't mean that I don't know someone that wouldn't be excited, right? So I think it's okay to ask some questions of the person that you're meeting with to make sure it's a good use of your time and theirs. And quite frankly, some of the hardest no's that I have to give are the ones where someone talks almost nonstop for 45 minutes. And I know 5 minutes in that Peter Kiewit Foundation unfortunately can't look at it. You've just wasted 40 minutes of your time that could be better spent finding the viable prospect rather than spending that energy on a dead end ask. So again, your goal isn't just to get a yes. That's the ideal landing spot. Your goal is to get an answer. And if someone's on a no, you want to know that sooner also so you can pivot your ask, right? That doesn't sound like it's something we'd look at. Well, you can pivot and say, well, maybe there's something I haven't shared yet that might make you a little bit more interested. Or it sounds like a firm no. Could you give me good insight as to where we should go with this request? Is there someone else in your community or the field that you work in that might be interested? Worst case scenario, they say no, but if you present yourself thoughtfully, professionally, even when they hear, like you get the no, right, sitting with someone, they're going to hear about that project when they run into someone somewhere else in town. And they're going to say, man, that didn't work for us, but I was really impressed with how they presented their case. I rambled there for a bit, but there you go.
I have like a full sheet of notes now, Paul. So that was no, I don't think you rambled nearly enough. No, thank you. Let's see, what other questions that I want to ask? I was going to ask, just from a personal perspective, would you be able to share a little bit about how your personal approach or personal philosophy around fundraising has changed over the years, being to get to be a part of so many different projects across the state?
Yeah, I spent some time on the ask side, and I mean, if I could go backwards 12 years and tell a younger version of myself what I know now, I think Kevin brings up a good point. Like, people are people, businesses are people.
Hmm.
And not to psych myself out so soon. I think there was a lot of doubt in my abilities when really I knew the work quite well and could tell the best story. Not to be discouraged by the no. I think that if I would have been a little bit more bold in my fundraising, like pursue the opportunity earlier rather than waiting to know everything about who I'm talking to or everything about the project I'm working on. There isn't anything wrong with reaching out sooner and just kind of testing the water or seeing if it's a line to ask. And I think more so now than ever, like, it's a really interesting time where I look at, I've shifted from thinking about, oh, that's a great project, to really thinking more about, oh, that's a great community.
Hmm.
Great projects don't happen in boring, sleepy, dissolving communities. Great projects happen because of great people, right? So like, I think I wish in this role at Peter Kiewit Foundation earlier, I would have spent more time paying attention to the place where the work is occurring, just as much, if not more, than the project itself. I think where the work is occurring is such a compelling piece of the story. And what, like, we look at a lot of capital projects. Yes, I love brick and mortar. You know what? Nothing like a good piece of steel going in the ground. That's awesome. But you know what's way more interesting? Hearing a story about why a playground project came to be, like the people involved with the work and the families that are going to be affected by the effective change. And often those exciting stories are, they're bridging generations and people that don't have everything in common, coming together around something that benefits so much more of the community. So I think I wish I could have learned some of those things a little bit sooner.
Paul, it's like you are reading my notes right now. Speaking of communities that are doing the work and projects being led by some great people. The next person that I'd like to ask you questions to is Allie Benzel on the call. She's from Sydney. Allie's a physical therapist at Sydney Regional Medical Center. Allie's a lifelong resident of Sydney. She's a married mom of 3, 1 fur baby. Her family loves outdoor activities and enjoying the park all 12 months of the year. So the Sydney Park project, if I can just give a little background on it, Allie, so people know what we're talking about. Thank you for joining us today.
Yep.
Was funded entirely by donations, grants, and community fundraisers. After raising more than $700,000, the playground officially opened in August of 2022. The vision of the Sydney Park project is to update playground equipment to provide opportunities for all ages to meet, interact, and grow. Updating the playground services allowed improved accessibility for all generations. Allie, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, would you be willing to start at the beginning of the story of the Sydney Park project? Maybe tell us a little bit about where this idea came from and how, let's see, Paul, how did you put it? How your coalition of the willing kind of came together.
Yes. So this project actually started with my sister. I have a younger sister. She is a physical therapy assistant. I'm a physical therapist. She had moved back to the community and had started seeing pediatric patients. With that, they see kids in the school, they can see kids in their home, but they were realizing that they couldn't see kids at our park. Our previous park was kind of gravel, had been kind of pieced together through the decades. So we had a few older antique pieces as well. And it just wasn't going to be a place that they could meet patients. She asked me for my help, and I kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit. But I had worked with a patient that summer. My patient's name was Marianne. Marianne came to the park one day with her grandkids. She'd worked hard all summer to be able to leave her home again, get stronger after being sick. And she couldn't get through our park. She couldn't get her walker through our park. She couldn't access to where the sitting was. She couldn't get to anywhere. So she had to stay in the car that day. And that's when it kind of was my aha moment that, okay, the park is not just about our kids. It's about our grandparents that want to come. It's about aunt and uncles that need to be able to access and get to where everybody is. It's a meeting point for our entire community. And so I agreed to help Maddie, and we kind of grew the project from there. We originally just wanted to maybe do a few pieces and some surfacing, but as our project kind of evolved and we kind of figured out what our community was looking for or what they were hoping for, our project grew kind of quickly. So then we kind of grew a board of people who are really passionate about the same accessibility in our community, and kind of went from there.
When you, I'm curious, because we're talking about fundraising today, when you, what were some of your initial reactions once you kind of started to land on what that price tag was going to be? Was that something that you were not worried about? Was it something that was real intimidating? Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
Honestly, it was a little shocking at first. We originally thought, maybe we could raise $200,000 and we could do a few pieces and maybe some surface in one area. But as we continued to work on the project, we just realized that that would not really meet our community needs. And we didn't think that doing it in stages would allow it to be completed. So it was a very big price tag. Maddie and myself, and even some of our very first initial board members, didn't have a lot of experience with that size of a budget, raising that kind of money. It was also kind of after the Cabela stuff had settled down. So we weren't really sure exactly where our community was at financially, as far as had people recovered, did they feel secure, and that kind of a big number like that. It was definitely a big number when we initially rolled it out, and it definitely raised some eyebrows initially. But it was good. It's definitely kind of one of our big hurdles that we first had to come over was accepting kind of what the project would look like and how big it would be.
How did you who did you go to start to piece some of those, of knowing who to talk to or where to start? Was this all you digging into your own personal network to figure this out?
Yes, we had definitely had some members of our community who had done a big project like this. Actually, when Maddie and I were kids, they put in the community center. And so there was still some people who had done that fundraising. This is when relationships kind of come into play a little bit. We have an aunt or a family member that is Pam Abbott from the Ogallala area, and she was very deeply involved in the Nebraska Community Foundation. And so she gave us some resources of people to contact, kind of how to start, and that really helped as well. Gianna came out and did a lot of education with us as well on we had started kind of doing some of the ask. And so we had a little experience, but she really kind of helped clean up our process and gave us some good ideas. I think Jana gave us confidence that our ask wasn't too crazy. We weren't too out there to even approach people, because that's kind of what it felt like initially, is that it was such a big ask that it was a little intimidating at first.
Totally. If you haven't yet, on the Google Slides, there is a picture of the park on slide 11. I've been out in Sydney, and there's a link to their website too, if you want to take a look at it on that page. I've been in Sydney a few times in the last month, and there's always kids and families at the park. It is really impressive.
It's been fun to watch this last year.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's like really, really satisfying to get to see it finally come to fruition. Conversations you and I have had outside of this, you've shared some of that there wasn't always like that. There was pushback from certain people. Do you want to share kind of what it was like getting through those hurdles as you were in the middle of
the thick of it?
Yeah, thick of it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think, again, initially the price tag was really big, which was hard. Maddie and I are community members, but we had not shown an ability to do this type of project prior. You know, we'd been part of smaller things before, so experience. And that's what really led us to kind of drive our board to being a little bit bigger and bringing in more experience. It was originally, I think, because of Cabela's leaving and kind of people feeling a little unstable, everybody was just a little bit hesitant to have something this big kind of brought in with that kind of financial price tag. So, but I think once people realized where the dream was going and we started getting a little bit of momentum, nobody wanted to be the first people on the wagon necessarily. But then once we kind of had a little bit of momentum, which was again due to some really big donors and some big support originally, it really kind of got the ball rolling for us. I think one of our biggest lessons that we learned was you have to have some money to get any kind of money. So a lot of matching grants and things like that really helped kind of ignite our project and allowed us to kind of go.
That makes total sense. So this kind of leads me to my next question is, because I'm sure this will happen on your next big project that you take. Whatever it might be. What are going to be some of the first steps that you're going to take, or you would encourage others to take that are taking on big projects?
Yeah, I really like the relationship part that kind of people spoke to. Maddie and I were members of the community, so we knew a lot of people and had a relationship. But I think our relationship has changed as we took this role on as being more of an active contributing member. Not to say that we weren't contributing members, but I think now that we have the relationships with people showing, you know, we've kind of come into adulthood, we can kind of manage projects like this. I think that helps, and people have reached out just to find out kind of what that next thing is. I think there is an excitement now, and that relationship has opened that communication of what people want to do or what they're interested in or what they think the next project should be. So that's been kind of fun to see as well. But I think continuing to expand those relationships and keep communication open is probably our next biggest things.
That's fantastic. All right. I really haven't paused too many times to open it up to everyone else on the call. If there's other questions for any of our four panelists before we wrap up here.
Anders, I'd like to build on something that Paul said. And by the way, Allie, that's an amazing story.
Thanks.
And awesome leadership. Yeah, I know, having worked a little bit in the autism community, I know how hard it is to build up, or I mean, I've heard, I've dialogued about like how hard it is to build up that like stuff that goes around health. You know, there's like, you know, primary emergency like health care, you know, facilities, and that's great. But there's all these things that go around health and wellness that, you know, there's gaps there sometimes in rural communities, and that's awesome leadership. So I had to say that. But Paul was like talking about like, say like a couple sentences and then open it up for your listener. You know, I just have to say that that's, you know, an awesome point and great advice. And the way to get there is by repetition. The way to like get past the feeling of needing to say everything is by like saying everything like a couple times a day for several weeks, to the point where like you're tired of it. you know it, so you don't feel like you have to keep speaking it into the world. You know, a bunch of other people know it too, so you can like feel okay going into a meeting with a stranger, just saying, you know, the 5-minute version of it, or less, and then just saying, so what do you think about this? And you know, but only repetition is going to get you there, in my humble opinion. What do you think, Paul?
Anyone have a band teacher or a solid coach that used to say, practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect? Disclaimer, there's no such thing as perfect. I think one of the worst feelings is going in for like a pitch. And you're like, I can do this, but you literally, like, you haven't said it to the mirror, you haven't said it to a friend, you haven't practiced it at all. And you get in your own way. That's the worst feeling. So, yes, repetition. And I think also just practicing, like, what is the 30-second version? Find a friend of yours that doesn't know anything about what you're talking about and try, like, all you need is 30 seconds. And see if you can get them to ask you a follow-up question. If you talk for 30 seconds and you're like, and you stop, and that person you're talking to has no question of curiosity, you need to tweak your first 30 seconds. It should spark curiosity for them to want to learn more. If you can't do that in 30 seconds, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to capture that audience of one or however many to really track where you're going to go with the rest of the story. And believe me, you want to lose them in 30 seconds and be talking for 40 minutes, right? Like, have that solid opening and invite them into the conversation, and practicing that. Or I like Kevin's idea of get it all out there so you're really comfortable with all facets of the project, and that's what you practice on your own so that you can go off the cuff when you start getting the questions.
Well, we are coming up on 1 o'clock here, end of our hour. So I am, oh, Ken has a question for us. Thank you all for your time and your stories. It's great to hear about challenges conquered. So shout out to Allie. Question to all. How small does a state get? Also, are any of y'all going to NIDA? I know from my experience working at Nebraska Foundation, the state does get pretty small. So you get to know each other pretty quick. And the different communities where you're going, I think that's where your question is coming from, Ken. But yeah, it does get pretty interconnected. Yeah, does anyone else want to share their experience with how small of a world it can be?
You better behave yourself wherever you are. That's a lesson.
Casey, I feel like that's directed at me.
Well, I will. I'm going to wrap us up with a couple of announcements before I thank all of our speakers. First off, our call to speakers for our 2023 summit just closed this past week. So our summit committee is currently reading through those proposals and developing what our lineup's going to look like. So keep your eyes out for the official announcement here within the next couple months. Probably shorter than that, but I'll say a couple months. In the meantime, be sure to put the summit on your calendar. As Kelsey shared, October 18th is our pre-session, and the summit itself is on the 19th of October in Kearney. And then also, if your calendar, our next Now What webinar is going to be in July. As always, if there's a topic you're passionate about, want to share expertise, let us know. Kelsey, myself, anyone else that's involved with CYN. With that, Casey, Kevin, Paul, Allie, thank you for taking the time to share your stories today. I know I'm going to be sharing many pieces of wisdom that I wrote down with folks from this session. So thank you. And with that, have a great rest of your Tuesday, everyone.
Thank you.